They toasted champagne in Maui, captioning their selfie, "Wish you were classy enough to be here." They didn't know that while they burned through $90,000 of stolen company money, I was freezing in a beat-up van clutching my grandfather's secret weapon. They thought his billionaire best friend was a nobody, but when my phone rang at 2 in the morning, I knew their reign was over. It was time to teach them what inheritance really means. My name is Mark Williams. I am 32 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the chief engineer of one of the most respected architectural firms in Seattle. Tonight, however, I am just a shivering body wrapped in 3 layers of Goodwill wool, trying to convince myself that the condensation dripping from the metal ceiling of my 1998 Ford Econoline van is part of the adventure. They call it van life on social media, painting pictures of sunsets and freedom. But when you are forced into it, when it is the only thing standing between you and a sleeping bag on the concrete sidewalk, the romance dies instantly. It smells like stale sweat and mildew. It feels like fear. I parked the van in a desolate lot behind an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It is the only place I have found where the police do not bang on my window at 3 in the morning, shining flashlights in my face and telling me to move along. I shifted my weight on the thin mattress, trying to avoid the broken spring that dug into my hip. Dinner tonight was a can of ravioli that had expired 4 months ago, eaten cold, because my portable stove ran out of butane 2 days prior. I scraped the bottom of the tin, savoring the metallic tomato sauce, knowing that tomorrow I would have to sneak into the 24-hour gym 3 miles away just to get a hot shower and fill my water jugs. This was my reality. A ghost in the city my father helped build. Then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up the cramped, dark interior of the van, blinding me for a second. It was a message from Kevin, my half-brother. The notification alone made my stomach turn a mix of anxiety and conditioned rage. I should have ignored it. I should have turned the phone off to save the 12% battery I had left. But like a man picking at a scab, I unlocked the screen. It was a photo. A high-resolution, vivid window into a world I used to belong to. They were in Hawaii. I recognized the backdrop immediately as the Grand Wailea in Maui, a place my father used to take us before he got sick, before Linda turned our lives into a chessboard. In the foreground, Kevin was grinning, his face flushed with alcohol and sun. His arm was draped around his wife, and on his other side sat Linda, my stepmother, holding a crystal flute of champagne with her pinky extended. They looked golden, happy, and obscenely wealthy, but it was the caption that made my breath hitch in my throat. "Wish you were classy enough to be here, Mark. Aloha from paradise." I zoomed in on the photo, my thumb trembling against the cracked screen. That is when I saw it. Deliberately placed on the teak table in the foreground, angled perfectly toward the camera lens, was the hotel folio. The total balance was circled in red marker, likely by Kevin, just before he snapped the picture. $92,450. They had spent over $90,000 in less than a week. I stared at the number until the pixels blurred. $90,000. That amount of money could get me out of this van. It could pay off the debts Linda had saddled me with. It could restart my life. But more importantly, that money did not belong to them. It belonged to the company. It belonged to the structural engineers and the site managers back in Seattle, who had not received a paycheck in 2 months. I knew because I still talked to a few of them, listening to their panicked whispers about missed mortgage payments and empty fridges. Linda and Kevin were drinking vintage Dom Perignon, while the people who actually built their empire were drowning. The injustice of it felt like a physical blow to the chest. 6 months. That was how long it had been since the day my life collapsed. I remembered it with agonizing clarity. I had walked into Summit Skyline, the firm my father and grandfather built from the ground up, ready to present the final safety specs for the Riverside Plaza project. Instead, I was met by security guards and a smirking Linda. She had accused me of leaking proprietary designs to a rival developer. It was absurd. Summit Skyline was my blood, my heritage. But Linda had prepared well. She had falsified emails, planted digital evidence, and used her status as the temporary executor of my father's estate to bypass the board. She fired me on the spot for gross misconduct. Then came the real blow. She used the estate's lawyers to freeze my personal assets, claiming I owed the company damages for the alleged leak. She blacklisted me, spreading rumors through the industry that I was unstable and untrustworthy. In a month, I went from a six-figure salary to unhireable. In 3 months, I lost my apartment. Now I am here. I looked back at the photo of Kevin's smug face. He had never worked a day in his life. He barely scraped through community college. Yet now he sat in the CEO's chair, or at least pretended to, while Linda pulled the strings. They were rot. They were termites eating away at the foundation of a legacy they did not understand, treating the company treasury like a personal piggy bank. "Bastards!" I whispered, my voice cracking, in the cold air. "You are going to kill the company." I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to throw the phone against the metal wall of the van. What was the point? Why was I fighting to survive? I was eating expired pasta in the dark while they laughed at me from a 5-star resort. The game was rigged. Linda had won. She had the lawyers, the money, and the power. I had a rust bucket and a tarnished name. I hovered my finger over the delete button. I wanted to erase them. I wanted to turn off the phone, curl up in my sleeping bag, and just let the cold take me. Maybe if I just stopped trying, the pain would stop too. I was ready to surrender. I was ready to accept that Mark Williams, the engineer, was dead and only this shell remained. But just as my thumb touched the screen, a notification banner slid down from the top. It was an email. My heart skipped a beat. Nobody emailed me anymore. Not recruiters, not friends, nobody. I tapped it, expecting a bill collector or a spam bot selling pills. The email had bypassed my main inbox and landed in the spam folder, but the subject line froze me in place. Subject: your grandfather saw what they did. I sat up straight, ignoring the sharp pain in my back. My grandfather had been dead for 10 years. He was the legend of the family, the man who poured concrete with his own hands before he ever sat behind a desk. Linda hated him. He had never liked her, me either. I opened the email. The sender was a name I had never seen before in my life. From Arthur Pendleton, I read the name out loud. Arthur Pendleton. It sounded old-fashioned, heavy, with a history I did not know. The body of the email was short, devoid of pleasantries or corporate formatting. "Mark, why know you are reading this on a phone with a cracked screen. I know about the van. I know about the lies Linda told the board. Most importantly, I know they are in Hawaii spending the emergency reserve fund. Your grandfather Thomas was a man who planned for storms. He knew a day might come when wolves would try to take the house. He left a key mark, but he told me never to use it, unless the bloodline was in mortal danger. I have been watching. You have taken enough hits. If you want to stop crying and start fighting, meet me at the Crimson King Chess Club on 4th Avenue, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Do not be late. And do not sell the van yet. We have work to do." A P. I stared at the screen until the backlight dimmed and shut off, plunging me back into darkness. My breath came in short, sharp clouds. Who was Arthur Pendleton? How did he know about the van? How did he know about the cracked screen? The despair that had been crushing my lungs moments ago began to recede, replaced by something I had not felt in 6 months. It was a cold, hard knot in the center of my chest. It was not hope exactly. It was curiosity. And beneath that, a low, burning anger that finally had a direction to aim at. I looked at the black mirror of my phone. I did not delete Kevin's photo. Instead, I saved it. I wanted to keep it. I wanted to look at that $90,000 bill every single day, until I made them eat every cent of it. I lay back down, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to my chin. For the first time in half a year, I did not care about the cold. I closed my eyes, and the name echoed in my mind like the tolling of a bell. Arthur Pendleton. Tomorrow I would find out if he was a savior or just another ghost. But one thing was certain. The Mark Williams who was ready to give up and die in a van was gone. The man waking up tomorrow was going to war. The Crimson King Chess Club was not the kind of place you found by accident. Tucked away in the shadow of a rusted fire escape on 4th Avenue, it looked less like a private club and more like a relic from a forgotten era. I hesitated at the door. My reflection in the darkened glass was pathetic. I was wearing my only clean shirt, which was still wrinkled from being stuffed in a duffel bag, and my hair had grown too long, curling over my collar in a way that screamed neglect rather than style. I almost turned around. The instinct to retreat to the safety of my van to hide from the judgment of the world was powerful. But the memory of that $90,000 receipt burned in my mind. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of old paper floor wax and intense concentration. It was silent, save for the soft clack of wooden pieces moving across boards and the ticking of analog game clocks. There were no waiters serving cocktails here, just rows of serious men and women hunched over tables. In the far corner, sitting alone at a mahogany table that looked older than the building itself, was a man who could only be Arthur Pendleton. He was 75 years old, but he sat with a spinal alignment that suggested military discipline. He wore a simple gray cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses, looking like a retired librarian, yet the air around him felt charged. As I approached, he did not look up from the chessboard immediately. He moved a white knight, tapped the clock, and then finally raised his eyes. They were the same color as steel, sharp and unyielding. "You have your grandfather's chin," he said. His voice was gravelly, like tires rolling over loose stones. "But you have your father's eyes. Too kind for your own good. Sit down, Mark." I sat. The chair was solid oak, uncomfortable and firm. "You said you knew Thomas," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. Arthur smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Knew him. I carried him through a rice paddy in 1968 with a bullet in his leg. And 10 years later, when he wanted to build his first skyscraper and the banks laughed at him, I was the one who put up the collateral. We were not just partners, Mark. We were brothers in everything but blood." He reached into a leather satchel on the floor and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. He slid it across the table. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, but he was paranoid. He saw things in people that they tried to hide. And the day your father married Linda Thomas came to me. He told me that woman had a hollow soul. He was terrified that one day she would get her hands on the company and strip it for parts." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. He was right. He usually was, Arthur said. That is why we created the Guardian Covenant. I stared at him. "What?" "A dormant clause in his last will and testament," Arthur explained, tapping the envelope. "It is a legal dead man switch. Thomas left 40% of the voting shares to me, not to your father, and certainly not to Linda. But these shares are invisible. They are held in a blind trust that only activates under specific conditions. Condition 1 is gross negligence. Condition 2 is the moral or financial persecution of his direct bloodline." He leaned forward, his intensity pinning me to the chair. "I have the power to veto the board. I have the power to fire the CEO. I have the power to burn their little kingdom to the ground if I choose to. But I could not step in until I was certain." "Certain of what?" I asked, anger flaring up. "That they ruined me. You said you were watching. Where were you 6 months ago? Where were you when security escorted me out of the building? Where were you when I sold my furniture just to buy gas?" Arthur did not flinch. "I was watching, and I was waiting. If I had stepped in the moment you stumbled, you would have remained a boy. I needed to see if you would break. I needed to know if you had the grit to survive the gutter, because taking back this company is going to require a fighter, not a victim. I am not a victim, I snapped. Then tell me, Arthur challenged. Tell me exactly what they did to you. Not the corporate lie. The truth. I took a deep breath, the shame and rage mixing in my throat. It wasn't just the firing, I said quietly. It was the accident. 2 weeks before they let me go, I slipped on the site at the Northgate project. Tore my meniscus. It was a minor injury, easy fix with surgery. But when I went to file the claim, HR told me my coverage had been suspended, pending an internal review. Linda had cut my health insurance retroactively. I had to pay for the emergency room out of pocket. Then when she fired me and froze my accounts, the medical bills went to collections. That is why I lost the condo. That is why I am in a van. They didn't just take my job, Arthur. They took my ability to walk without pain. And then they took my home to pay for it. Arthur's face darkened. The calm, grandfatherly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold fury that was terrifying to witness. His hand clenched into a fist on the table. She cut the insurance, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Thomas built that company to feed families, and she uses it to starve his own grandson. She told me Grandpa died broke, I added. She said he made bad investments in his final years, and there was nothing left for me, so I should be grateful she even gave me a job. Arthur laughed a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Broke Thomas died with a portfolio worth $40 million. It is all there, Mark. Locked in the trust. She lied to you because she knew if you had resources, you would fight her. She wanted you weak. She wanted you desperate. He opened the envelope and pulled out a checkbook and a black keycard. He slid them toward me. I am done watching, Arthur said. This checkbook is linked to an account with enough funds to get you out of that van and into a suit. But this is not charity. Consider it ammunition. I looked at the black keycard. It was blank, no logo, no magnetic strip visible. What is this? I asked. That, Arthur said, is a master override key for the Summit Skyline security grid. My team built the original system. Linda upgraded the cameras, but she never replaced the hard lines in the server room because it was too expensive. That key will get you into the building. He looked me dead in the eye. I can provide the lawyers. I can provide the money. I can freeze their assets eventually. But legal battles take years. We do not have years. If they are spending $90,000 on a vacation, they are bleeding the company dry right now. We need proof of immediate criminal negligence. We need a smoking gun. You want me to break in, I realized. I want you to go home, Arthur corrected. They are in Hawaii. The building is empty except for the night shift security, who are mostly asleep by 3 a.m. You know the layout better than anyone. Go in. Find the books. Find the real project logs for the Riverside Plaza. Bring me something I can use to destroy them in open court. I looked at the keycard. My heart was pounding against my ribs. This was a felony. If I got caught, I would go to prison and Linda would win forever. But then I thought about Kevin's smile in the photo. I thought about the cold nights in the van. I thought about my grandfather, a man I barely knew, who had tried to protect me from the grave. I reached out and took the key. It felt heavy in my hand like a weapon. Tonight, I asked. Arthur nodded, turning his attention back to the chessboard. He moved a pawn forward, opening a line of attack. Tonight. The wolves are away, Mark. It is time for the sheep to show its teeth. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance of the Summit Skyline Tower, the water dripping off the brim of my cap. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt entirely out of place in the silent, sleeping city. In my pocket, My fingers curled around a piece of plastic that should have been deactivated 6 months ago. It was my old ID badge. When Linda had security march me out, they had demanded my laptop and my keys, but in the chaos, they had forgotten to ask for the badge in my wallet. I had kept it a pathetic souvenir of the life I used to have. Now it was my way back in. A tiny static-laced voice buzzed in my right ear. It was Arthur. "My team has looped the feed on the external cameras," he said. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were ordering a sandwich rather than orchestrating a felony. "You have a 60-second window before the system refreshes. Swipe the card now." I stepped out of the shadows and pressed the plastic rectangle against the black reader. I held my breath. If Linda had been competent, this reader would flash red, and a silent alarm would trip at the nearest precinct. But Linda was not competent. She was arrogant. She assumed that once I was gone, I ceased to exist. The light turned green. A heavy mechanical clack echoed as the magnetic lock disengaged. "I am in," I whispered, slipping inside and letting the heavy steel door close softly behind me. The air inside was recycled and cool, smelling faintly of lemon floor wax. It was a smell I had breathed for 10 years, a smell that used to mean productivity and purpose. Now, walking through the darkened lobby, it felt like breaking into a mausoleum. I moved past the main reception desk, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished marble. To my left was the Hall of Models, a glass-encased corridor displaying the miniatures of every skyscraper my family had built. I shone my small flashlight over them. There was the Zenith Tower, my grandfather's masterpiece. There was the Horizon Spire, my father's legacy. And at the end, half covered by a drop cloth, was my project, the Riverside Plaza. Seeing it, abandoned in the dark gathering dust, felt like seeing a child left behind at a bus station. "Keep moving," Arthur commanded in my ear. "The night guard is on the 4th floor making coffee. You need to get to the penthouse suite before he starts his rounds. Take the service elevator. I have disabled the call log." I slipped into the freight elevator and hit the button for the 30th floor. As the numbers climbed, my anxiety began to morph into a cold professional focus. I was not just a trespasser here. I was the chief engineer. I knew this building's bones better than anyone. I knew that the ventilation shafts on the north side hummed too loud because of a design flaw in the intake valves. I knew the service elevator rattled between the 12th and 13th floors. The doors slid open on the 30th floor, the executive level. I made my way down the plush, carpeted hallway toward the CEO's office. The nameplate on the door used to say Thomas Williams, then Robert Williams. Now it read Kevin Miller. Seeing that name in gold letters made my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Kevin never cared about security protocols. I stepped inside and shone my light around. The office was a disgrace. My father had kept this room immaculate, a sanctuary of blueprints and drafting tables. Kevin had turned it into a fraternity lounge. There were empty takeout boxes piled on the leather sofa, crusty with old cheese. A half-empty bottle of 18-year-old Macallan Scotch sat uncorked on the desk, dangerously close to a stack of legal documents. A gaming console was hooked up to the massive presentation monitor on the wall. The room reeked of stale alcohol and negligence. I moved to the desk, ignoring the mess, and booted up the main computer. "I am at the terminal," I said. "Do you have the password?" "Try password 123, Arthur said dryly. "Or perhaps his birthday." I tried his birthday. Access denied. I tried money. Access denied. Then I looked at the framed photo on the desk, a picture of Kevin's Porsche. I typed in Porsche 911. Access granted. "I am in," I said, shaking my head. "He is an idiot." "He is a puppet," Arthur corrected. "Check the correspondence folders. Look for emails from Vance." I started digging. It did not take long to realize the truth. Kevin's inbox was full of forwarded emails from Vance, the chief financial officer. Every decision, every signature, every authorization came from Vance with a simple note. "Sign this, Kevin." Kevin did not read anything. He just rubber-stamped whatever Vance put in front of him. But then, I found a folder named Riverside Specs, Revised. I opened the file. It was a change order authorized 2 months ago, right after I was fired. I scrolled through the technical data, my eyes, scanning the numbers with the speed of practice. Suddenly, I stopped. The blood drained from my face. "Arthur," I said, my voice trembling. "They changed the structural steel." "Explain," Arthur demanded. "The original design for the Riverside Plaza called for AS/TMA 992 grade 50 steel for the main load-bearing columns," I said, my finger tracing the line on the screen. "It is the industry standard for high-rise seismic stability. It is expensive, but it is necessary." I pointed to the new specs on the screen. They swapped it out for a 36 grade, and not even domestic A36. This is imported uncertified steel from a supplier I have never heard of. The yield strength is 30% lower. Arthur, this steel cannot support the wind load at 40 stories. If a storm hits or a minor tremor, the shear stress will snap the bolts. I pulled up the billing invoices. My stomach churned. They were paying the supplier for the cheap steel, but the internal billing to the client still listed the price for the premium grade 50 steel. The difference was nearly $2 million. They are pocketing the difference, I realized, horror washing over me. They are stealing $2 million and building a death trap. If they finish this building, it will collapse. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. They are going to kill people. "Copy it," Arthur said. His voice was no longer bored. It was razor sharp. "Copy everything. The specs, the invoices, the email chain where Vance approves the swap. Get it all." I jammed a USB drive into the port and initiated the transfer. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 20%. Outside in the hallway, I heard the ding of the elevator. "Mark," Arthur warned. "Movement. The guard is on the floor." "I am only at 40%, I hissed, watching the green bar inch forward. "He is exiting the elevator. He is walking toward the office. You have 20 seconds. I stared at the screen, willing it to move faster. 60%. The sound of heavy footsteps on the carpet grew louder. The beam of a flashlight cut across the frosted glass of the office door. 80%. The doorknob turned. 90%. "Come on," I pleaded. Transfer complete. I yanked the drive out, killed the monitor, and dove behind the massive oak desk, just as the door swung open. The beam of the flashlight swept the room, illuminating the floating dust motes. I curled into a ball, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle my breathing. The guard's heavy boots stopped just feet away from where I lay. I could hear the jingle of his keys and the crackle of his radio. "Central, this is Miller," the guard grumbled into his radio. "Executive suite is clear. Just checking the thermostat. CEO left his heater on again." He walked over to the window, shining his light out at the rain-slicked city, then turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. I stayed frozen for a full minute, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would bruise my chest. "He is gone," Arthur whispered. "Take the fire stairs down. My driver is waiting in the alley. Get that drive to me, Mark. We have them." I stood up, my legs shaking. I looked one last time at the messy office, at the bottle of scotch, at the fraudulent papers that would doom hundreds of innocent people. I clutched the USB drive in my hand. It felt hotter than burning coal. "I am coming out," I said. I slipped out into the stairwell and began the long descent, taking the steps 2 at a time. I was no longer just a disgruntled heir fighting for his inheritance. I was an engineer again, and I was holding the detonator that would blow their entire corrupt world apart. The safe house Arthur had arranged for me was not a house at all, but a serviced apartment in a quiet high-security building downtown. For the first time in 180 days, I slept on a mattress that did not smell of mildew and exhaust fumes. I took a shower that lasted 45 minutes, letting the hot water scrub away the grime of the van and the cold sweat of the break-in. But as comfortable as the physical reprieve was, my mind was racing too fast to rest. By 8 in the morning, I was seated at the dining table, which had been converted into a command center. Arthur was already there, flanked by two men in sharp suits, who introduced themselves as forensic accountants. They treated the USB drive I had stolen like a radioactive isotope, plugging it into an air-gapped laptop to prevent any potential tracking software from alerting Linda. "We have decrypted the primary ledger," one of the accountants said, adjusting his glasses. "It is worse than we thought." "Mark, take a look at this." He spun the laptop around. On the screen was a complex web of transactions, a digital map of theft. I leaned in my engineer's eyes, scanning the rows of data. I was used to looking at load-bearing ratios and tensile strength charts, but math is math. If the numbers do not balance, the structure collapses. "Here is the payment for the structural steel." The accountant pointed to a line item dated 3 months ago. Summit Skyline authorized a payment of $2.4 million for ASTM A992 beams. That is the market rate for high-grade material. "Right," I said. "That is what the client was billed. That is what the investors think they bought." "Now, look at where the money actually went," Arthur said, his voice hard. I followed the money trail. The $2.4 million did not go to a steel foundry. It went to a holding company called Paradise Shell LLC, registered in a post office box in Reno, Nevada. From there, Paradise Shell LLC paid a Chinese supplier only $400,000 for the inferior grade A 36 steel. $2 million, I whispered. They skimmed $2 million on a single material order. "It gets more interesting," the second accountant added. "We ran a background check on Paradise Shell LLC. The registered agent is a lawyer, but the beneficial owners are hidden behind a trust. However, looking at the withdrawal patterns, we see a direct correlation between payouts from this shell company and the personal expenses of your stepmother and brother." He pulled up a side-by-side comparison. On the left was a withdrawal from Paradise Shell for $92,000. On the right was the hotel folio from the Grand Wailea in Maui. "They did not even try to hide it well," Arthur noted with disgust. "They billed the Hawaii trip to the shell company under market research and client entertainment. They are literally partying on the profit margin they made by compromising the safety of a 40-story building." I felt a wave of nausea. I pulled up the photo Kevin had sent me, the one with the caption mocking my poverty. "Wish you were classy enough to be here." I looked at the champagne, the smiles, the sun. Every drop of alcohol in that picture, every thread of clothing they wore was paid for by risking the lives of future tenants. They were not just thieves. They were potential murderers. "There is something else," I said, scrolling down to the technical sign-off sheets in the stolen files. "Linda and Kevin are greedy, but they are not suicidal. They know that if the building inspectors find the bad steel, someone has to go to jail. They would not sign these approval forms themselves." I opened the document titled Structural Integrity Verification. My blood ran cold. At the bottom of the page, dated 2 weeks after I had been fired, was a signature. Mark Williams, Chief Engineer. It was my signature. Or rather, it was a perfect digital forgery of it. "She framed me," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure, it felt like clarity. "She forged my signature on the substandard material orders. If the Riverside Plaza collapses, or even if it just fails inspection, the paper trail leads straight to me. She would claim I ordered the cheap steel before I was fired to pocket the kickback, and she was just the victim of a rogue employee." Arthur slammed his hand on the table, rattling the coffee cups. "That is why she destroyed your reputation. That is why she cut your insurance and isolated you. She needed you to be the perfect scapegoat, a disgruntled, unstable ex-employee who sabotaged the company. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city rain. I felt violated in a way that being homeless had never made me feel. Being poor was a circumstance. This was an erasure of my soul. My grandfather had taught me that an engineer's signature was his bond. It was a promise that the people inside the building would be safe. Linda had taken that promise and turned it into a weapon to kill me. "We have them," Arthur said, coming up behind me. "This digital trail proves the forgery. We can prove you were not even in the building when that document was signed. We can prove the money went to their shell company, not yours." "It is not enough," I said, turning to face him. "If we just go to the police, she will hire high-priced defense attorneys. She will drag it out for 5 years. She will blame Vance. She will blame Kevin. She might even get away with a slap on the wrist while the company goes bankrupt and the employees lose their pensions. I want her dead to rights. I want her to lose everything publicly and permanently." Arthur nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "Then you will like what I am about to tell you." He sat down and opened a leather portfolio. "Linda believes she owns 60% of the voting stock. She thinks my 40% is preferred Class B stock, meaning I get dividends but have no say in how the company is run. That is what Thomas let everyone believe." "And?" I asked. "And," Arthur continued, "Thomas added a trigger clause to the stock issuance. In the event of proven criminal malfeasance by the majority shareholder, my Class B stock converts instantly to Class A supervoting shares. One of my shares becomes worth 10 of hers. The moment we present this evidence to the board, I do not just have a vote mark. I have absolute control. I can fire the entire executive suite without asking permission." The magnitude of the trap my grandfather had set took my breath away. He had known. He had known for years that Linda was a snake, and he had built a cage for her waiting for the moment she decided to bite. "So, what is the play?" I asked. "They land tomorrow afternoon," Arthur said. "They are planning a town hall meeting at the office to brag about their successful business trip and announce the new austerity measures, meaning layoffs. They want to show off their tan and put the fear of God into the staff." I looked at the forged signature on the screen one last time. "Then let's give them a welcome home party," I said. "I do not want to just sue them, Arthur. I want to walk into that room and look her in the eye when the world falls apart." "Agreed," Arthur said. "We will spend the next 24 hours preparing the legal briefs and the presentation. When they walk onto that stage, they will be stepping onto a landmine." I sat back down at the computer. The fear was gone. The shame of the van was gone. I was no longer the victim shivering in the dark. I was the executioner, and for the first time in 6 months, I had the axe in my hand. "Let's get to work," I said. "I want to make sure the math is perfect." The main conference hall of Summit Skyline was packed to capacity, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and palpable dread. It was the kind of mandatory all-hands meeting that usually signaled bad news, and judging by the whispered conversations among the junior architects and administrative staff, everyone knew the axe was about to fall. I stood in the back corner of the room, leaning against a pillar invisible in a grease-stained gray maintenance jumpsuit, with a name tag that read Dave. A faded baseball cap was pulled low over my eyes, and I held a mop bucket as a prop, though my hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of restraining the hurricane of rage building inside me. The double doors swung open with a dramatic flourish, and in walked the conquering heroes. Linda led the charge, looking like she had just stepped off a runway in Milan, rather than a long-haul flight. She was wearing a white power suit that probably cost more than the annual salary of the receptionist standing next to me, and her skin was bronzed to a deep, unnatural mahogany from the Hawaiian sun. Flanking her was Kevin, wearing a linen suit and sunglasses indoors, and his wife, who was busy typing on her phone, looking bored by the prospect of interacting with the commoners. They marched up the center aisle, ignoring the tense silence of the room, and took their places on the elevated stage. Linda tapped the microphone, the high-pitched feedback causing a few people to wince. "Good afternoon, Summit family." Linda began her voice, dripping with a fake warmth that made my skin crawl. "It is so good to be home. As you know, Kevin and I have been away on a critical strategic retreat meeting with potential international investors to secure the future of this company." I tightened my grip on the mop handle. Strategic retreat. They called burning $90,000 on massages and champagne a strategic retreat. However, Linda continued her expression, shifting to a practiced mask of solemnity. "The market is tough. We are facing headwinds. And in order to keep this ship sailing, we need to make some difficult choices. We need to become leaner. We need to optimize. Therefore, it is with a heavy heart that I announce we will be reducing our workforce by 15% over the next quarter." A gasp rippled through the room. I saw the head of the accounting department put her face in her hands. 15%. There was 50 people. 50 families who would lose their livelihood, so Linda could keep hers. "It is a necessary sacrifice," Linda said, fingering the diamond necklace at her throat. "We all have to tighten our belts." Then Kevin stepped up to the podium, looking far too excited for a funeral. He clapped his hands together, grinning like a game show host. "But hey, it is not all doom and gloom," Kevin shouted, oblivious to the sullen mood. "We want to show you what is possible if you stick with us. We want to show you the Summit Skyline dream." He clicked a remote, and the massive projector screen behind him lit up. It was the photo. The same photo he had sent me. The three of them are raising glasses in Maui, the ocean, sparkling blue behind them. The receipt for $90,000, visibly sitting on the table. "This," Kevin said, gesturing grandly to the screen. "This is success. This is what happens when you are a winner. We worked hard for this. We earned this lifestyle. And if you survive the cuts and work hard enough, maybe, just maybe one day you can have a taste of this too." The audacity was breathtaking. He was literally flashing the evidence of his embezzlement in their faces and calling it motivation. I looked around the room. The employees were not inspired. They were furious. I saw clenched fists and narrowed eyes. They knew they were being mocked. "We have cleaned house recently," Kevin went on, his voice taking on a sneering tone. "We got rid of the dead weight. We got rid of the toxic elements that were holding us back. You all remember my brother Mark." The room went deadly silent. My name hung in the air like a curse. "Mark was a problem," Kevin said, pacing the stage. "He was lazy. He was entitled. He thought just because he had the last name Williams he owned this place. But we showed him the door. And look at us now, since we cut out the rot. 6 months ago, profits are, well, let's just say we are doing better than ever." He laughed, a cruel braying sound. "Let that be a lesson to anyone here who thinks they can coast. We are watching. We demand excellence." My blood was boiling so hot, I could barely see straight. He was standing there, using my name to terrorize the people I had worked alongside for 10 years, painting me as the villain while he spent their salaries on vodka and jet skis. I felt a vibration in the pocket of my jumpsuit. I reached in and pulled out my phone. It was a text message from Arthur. "It is time. Step into the light." I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. I let go of the mop bucket. It clattered loudly against the floor, the sound echoing through the silent hall like a gunshot. Heads turned. Kevin stopped laughing and squinted into the dim light at the back of the room. Linda looked annoyed at the interruption. "Excuse me," Linda snapped. "We are in the middle of a meeting. Maintenance, please handle that outside." I did not leave. I started walking. I walked down the center aisle, my heavy work boots thudding rhythmically against the carpet. I kept my head down, the cap obscuring my face. "Hey!" Kevin shouted. "Buddy, can't you here get out?" I kept walking. The employees seated along the aisle began to whisper. They recognized the walk. They recognized the set of the shoulders. I reached the foot of the stage and stopped. I was standing right in front of them now, looking up. The projector light washed over me, casting a long shadow back toward the audience. "Security!" Linda yelled, her voice rising an octave. "Remove this man immediately!" I reached up and grabbed the brim of my cap. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it off and tossed it onto the stage at Kevin's feet. Then I looked up, locking eyes with my stepmother. "Hello, Linda," I said, my voice calm, amplified by the acoustics of the room so that everyone could hear. "I heard you were looking for the toxic element." A collective gasp went up from the audience, louder this time. "It is Mark," someone whispered. "It is Mark Williams." Linda's face went white beneath her tan. She took a half step back, clutching the podium, as if the floor had suddenly tilted. Kevin looked like he had seen a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Mark," Linda stammered, her composure shattering. "What are you doing here? You are trespassing." "I have a restraining order." "Actually," I said, climbing the stairs onto the stage. "I am just here for the meeting. You were talking about cutting the dead weight, about optimizing the company. I thought I should come and help you with that." I stood next to Kevin at the podium. He shrank away from me, the arrogance evaporating instantly. I turned to the audience, to the hundreds of faces looking at me with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. "You said you wanted to show them the truth, Kevin," I said, pointing to the screen where the Hawaii photo still beamed. "You showed them the picture, but you forgot to tell them who paid for it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a black walkie-talkie. I pressed the button. "Now, Arthur," I said. The doors at the back of the room burst open again. But this time it was not a pair of tanned socialites who walked in. It was Arthur Pendleton, flanked by a phalanx of lawyers and uniformed police officers. Linda let out a strangled cry. The trap had sprung. "Get him out of here!" Linda shrieked, her voice cracking and losing all its polished executive timbre. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her entire arm trembling with rage. "He is homeless. He is mentally unstable. Look at him. He is filthy security. Why are you just standing there?" "Arrest this trespasser." The security guards, stationed near the doors, hesitated. They looked from Linda, whose face was contorted into a mask of ugly desperation, to me. They knew me. They had known me for 10 years. They remembered who remembered their birthdays and who ignored them. They did not move. I ignored her screaming. I reached over and firmly took the microphone from the podium stand. Kevin tried to snatch it back, his face flushing a deep, angry red. But I pivoted, turning my back to him and facing the sea of stunned employees. "I am not crazy, Linda," I said into the mic. My voice was steady, a stark, grounding contrast to her shrill panic. "And I am not here to beg for change. I am here to ask a question about accounting, specifically line item 402 on the quarterly expense report, the one labeled Market Research." I turned my head, slightly locking eyes with her. "Tell us, Linda, since when does market research involve a $92,000 bill for a penthouse suite and a private catamaran tour?" The room erupted in murmurs. The number hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "Liar," Linda spat, clutching the podium as if it were a life raft. "He is lying. He is just bitter because we fired him for incompetence. Do not listen to a word he says." "I have the receipts," I said, calmly, my voice booming over the speakers. "I have the emails. I have the photos you just showed everyone. You billed the company for your vacation, while you told these people there was no money for raises." That was when Kevin snapped. The humiliation was too much for his fragile ego to process. With a roar of inarticulate fury, he lunged at me, his fist drawn back, intent on smashing my face in right there on stage. "Shut up! Shut your mouth!" I did not flinch. I did not have to. Before Kevin could get within striking distance, a blur of motion intercepted him. One of the maintenance staff, who had been standing near the edge of the stage, a man who looked like he was fixing a loose floorboard, suddenly moved with the speed of a viper. He stepped up, caught Kevin's wrist in midair, and twisted it behind his back in a seamless, professional takedown. Kevin yelped in pain and was shoved firmly away, stumbling back into the projection screen. The maintenance man straightened his jacket. He was clearly not a janitor. He was a private security contractor. "Touch him again," the man said, his voice low and dangerous, "and I will break your arm." The audience gasped. The dynamic had shifted violently. This was no longer a disgruntled ex-employee making a scene. This was a hostile takeover. "Who are you people?" Linda demanded, backing away until she hit the wall. "This is my company. I own 60% of the shares. I am the chairman of the board. I will have you all thrown in jail." "You do not own this company, Linda," I said, my voice ringing out through the hall. "You never did. You were just holding the keys." "I am the majority shareholder," she screamed, her eyes bulging with hysteria. "I have the controlling vote. You are nothing. You are a disowned failure living in a truck." "I am not representing myself," I said. "I am representing the true owner of Summit Skyline." I pointed to the double doors at the back of the auditorium. "Now." The doors swung wide open, slamming against the walls with a thunderous crash that silenced the room instantly. Arthur Pendleton walked in. He did not look like a 75-year-old retiree. He walked with a cane, but he used it like a scepter. He was flanked by 4 lawyers in charcoal suits, carrying briefcases that looked like they contained nuclear launch codes. The procession moved down the center aisle, parting the sea of employees like Moses parting the Red Sea. The room was confused. To the junior architects and the new hires, he was just an old stranger. But to Linda, he was a ghost. I watched her face. It was a masterpiece of terror. The blood drained out of her cheeks so fast, she looked like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The glass of water she had been clutching slipped from her fingers. It hit the stage floor and shattered the sound of breaking glass, amplified by the microphone I was still holding. "Arthur," she whispered. It was barely audible, a breath of pure disbelief. Arthur stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to the stage. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold as ice. "Hello, Linda," Arthur said. His voice did not need a microphone to carry. It projected with the authority of a man who had built skyscrapers when she was still in grade school. "It has been a long time." "You," Linda stammered, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "You are supposed to be retired. You are supposed to be out of the picture." "I was," Arthur said, slowly climbing the stairs, "until you decided to turn my best friend's legacy into your personal piggy bank." He reached the center of the stage and stood next to me. He looked out at the audience, then turned his gaze back to Linda. "For those of you who do not know me," Arthur addressed the crowd, "my name is Arthur Pendleton. I co-founded this company 40 years ago, and for the last decade, I have held 40% of the shares in a silent trust." He signaled to one of his lawyers, who stepped forward and opened a briefcase, producing a document stamped with a red wax seal. "Linda here believes she owns 60%, Arthur continued, his voice hardening. "But she forgot to read the fine print of her husband's will. Specifically, the clause titled, 'The Guardian Covenant.'" Linda flinched, as if he had struck her. She knew. Deep down, she had always known it existed, but she had gambled that Arthur would never use it. "This covenant," Arthur declared, holding the document up for the room to see, states that in the event of gross financial misconduct or ethical violations by the acting chairperson, my Class B shares convert immediately into Class A super voting shares. As of 9 o'clock this morning, when we filed the evidence of embezzlement with the Securities and Exchange Commission, that conversion is complete. He turned to Linda, his eyes narrowing. My vote is now worth 10 times yours, Linda, which means I control 80% of the voting power of this company. The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. And my first act as majority shareholder, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, is to remove you from the position of chairperson, effective immediately. You are fired, Linda. Get off my stage. For a second, nobody moved. Then a low murmur started in the back of the room. It grew louder, swelling into a buzz of excitement. The employees looked from Linda, terrified, and small, to Arthur and me, standing tall. The fear that had gripped the room for months evaporated, replaced by a sudden, electric thrill. The tyrant had fallen. The stunned silence in the auditorium was broken by the sharp click of a briefcase latch. One of Arthur's attorneys, a woman with a face like chiseled granite, stepped forward and disconnected Kevin's laptop from the podium. The image of the smiling trio in Hawaii vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, high-contrast flowchart projected from the attorney's own machine. Ladies and gentlemen, the attorney announced, her voice crisp and projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. What you are looking at is a forensic trace of the company's liquidity over the last quarter. It is not a complicated picture. She used a laser pointer to circle a large, red block on the left side of the screen. Here we have the operating capital for the Riverside Plaza project, $2.4 million allocated for structural materials. The red dot moved across the screen to a black box in the center. And here is where the money actually went. A shell entity registered in Nevada called Paradise Shell LLC. And from there, the dot moved again, landing on a series of logos that everyone recognized. The Grand Wiley Resort, Private Jet Services, Cartier, Porsche. You stole it, I said, stepping up next to the screen. I looked at Kevin, who was sweating so profusely. His linen shirt was sticking to his chest. You did not just take a vacation. You laundered the construction budget through a fake vendor to pay for your lifestyle. Every bottle of champagne in that picture was paid for by stripping the safety budget of the Riverside Tower. That is a lie? Kevin stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. That is accounting jargon. You are twisting the numbers. Let us talk about twisting, I cut him off. I clicked a button on the remote I had taken from the podium. The screen changed again. This time, it showed a technical blueprint of a steel I-beam. This is a cross-section of the support columns you ordered. Grade A 36 steel. It is cheap. It is brittle. It has a yield strength 30% lower than what the city code requires. A murmur of horror went through the room. The architects and engineers in the audience understood exactly what that meant. They began to whisper, pointing at the screen, their faces pale. If we build with this, I said, my voice rising with legitimate anger, that building will not withstand a windstorm, let alone an earthquake. You did not just steal money, Kevin. You built a tomb. You were willing to bury hundreds of people under tons of concrete just so you could buy a new car. Linda stepped forward, her face a mask of indignation. This is absurd. We relied on the technical sign-offs if the materials are substandard. That is the fault of the chief engineer. That is your fault, Mark. Your signature is on the order. I had been waiting for this. I am glad you brought that up, I said. I clicked the remote again. A blown-up image of the purchase order appeared on the screen. At the bottom was my signature. It looked perfect. Too perfect. This is the document Linda is talking about, I explained to the crowd. It is dated October 15th. There is just one problem. I clicked again. A calendar appeared alongside a hospital admission record. On October 15th, I was in the emergency room at Harborview Medical Center having an MRI on my knee. I was sedated. I could not have signed a lunch order, let alone a $2 million contract. I turned to the screen, where a digital forensic analysis overlaid my real signature with the one on the document. And here is the digital metadata. This signature was copy-pasted from a PDF I signed 3 years ago. The pixelation on the curvature of the M gives it away. It is a forgery, Linda. And a sloppy one at that. The room erupted. The accusation of forgery was the final nail in the coffin of their credibility. Kevin, realizing the walls were closing in, did what cowards always do. He turned on his own. "It was Vance," Kevin shouted, pointing a shaking finger toward the back of the room where the executives usually sat. "I didn't know about the steel. Vance handles the procurement. He told me it was a cost-saving measure approved by the board. I just signed what he put in front of me. I am the victim here." The crowd turned to look for Vance, the CFO, but his seat was empty. "Vance isn't in his seat, Kevin," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the noise. "He is backstage." Arthur gestured to the side of the stage. The heavy velvet curtains parted, and Vance walked out. He looked tired, his tie loosened, holding a folder of documents. He did not look at Kevin or Linda. He walked straight to the microphone Arthur offered him. "Vance," Arthur said. "Did Kevin Miller know about the steel swap?" "Yes," Vance said into the mic. His voice was flat, defeated. "He authorized it specifically to clear up cash for the Hawaii trip. He said, and I quote, 'Nobody looks at the beams once the drywall is up.'" "And Linda?" Arthur asked. "She orchestrated the shell company," Vance continued. "She set up Paradise Shell LLC 6 months ago. She told me if I didn't process the transfers, she would fire me and blacklist me like she did Mark. I have the emails, the voice memos, everything. I turned it all over to Mr. Pendleton this morning in exchange for immunity." Kevin looked like he was going to be sick. He slumped against the podium, all the fight draining out of him. But Linda was not done. She possessed a narcissism so profound that it could warp reality to fit her needs. Seeing that denial was useless, she instantly switched tactics. Her face crumpled. Tears, impressive in their sudden volume, began to stream down her cheeks. She clasped her hands together and looked out at the audience, trembling like a leaf. "I did it for you," she wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "The company was drowning. We were going to go bankrupt. I had to make hard choices to save your jobs. I took that money to court investors, not for myself. I have sacrificed my entire life for this family, for this company." She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "And you, Mark, my son, how could you? After everything I have done for you, I raised you. I tried to toughen you up because the world is hard. And this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of my employees. You are an ungrateful, hateful child." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. For a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in the faces of some of the younger staff. She was good. She knew exactly how to play the martyr. "Enough," Arthur said. He did not shout. He just said the word with such finality that it stopped Linda mid-sob. "You say you sacrificed for this family," Arthur said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, antiquated digital voice recorder. "You say Thomas trusted you. You say you are the guardian of his legacy." He held the recorder up to the microphone. "Let us hear what Thomas actually thought." He pressed play. There was a crackle of static, and then a voice filled the room. It was raspy and weak, recorded clearly in a hospital room, but it was unmistakably my grandfather. "Arthur, if you are listening to this, then I am gone. And if you are playing this, then she has done it. She has tried to take it all." Linda froze. Her tears stopped instantly. She stared at the recorder as if it were a bomb. "Linda is a cancer, Arthur. My grandfather's voice continued echoing from the grave. She does not love my son. She loves the skyline we built. She looks at the steel and sees gold bars. I have tried to protect Mark, but I am too weak now. Watch her. Do not let her destroy the soul of this company. If she crosses the line, burn her out. Do not hesitate. She is not family. She is a parasite. Click. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Linda's mask had not just cracked. It had shattered into dust. There was no coming back from that. The founder himself had condemned her from beyond the grave. You have no friends here, Linda, I said quietly. And you have no family. I turned back to the laptop one last time. And just so we are all clear on what saving the company looks like, I hit the enter key. The photo on the big screen changed back to the Hawaii selfie, but I had made a small edit. Beneath the image of them smiling with their champagne, a new caption appeared in bold red letters. Evidence, Exhibit A embezzlement of $92,000. Paid for by company wages. That, I said, pointing to the screen, is your legacy, not the buildings, not the contracts. Just a greedy, pathetic vacation that you couldn't afford. Linda stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing. She looked small. She looked old. And for the first time in her life, she looked defeated. The silence that followed my grandfather's recording was heavy, but Arthur Pendleton was not a man who believed in letting an enemy catch their breath. He stepped closer to Linda and Kevin, his cane tapping rhythmically against the stage floor, like a ticking clock. You seem to be under the impression, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost pleasant tone that was far more terrifying than his shouting, that this ends with you simply losing your jobs. You think you will walk out of here, go back to your mansions, and live off the millions you have already siphoned away? He shook his head slowly. I am afraid not. You see, when we handed over the evidence of the shell company to the Securities and Exchange Commission this morning, we also sent a copy to your personal banks. We flagged every transaction over the last 6 months as proceeds of crime. Kevin's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. What does that mean? He whispered. It means, I answered, stepping in to deliver the blow, that as of 10 minutes ago, your personal assets have been frozen, pending a federal investigation. Your credit cards will not swipe. Your checking accounts are locked. You cannot even buy a pack of gum, Kevin. You cannot do that, Linda shrieked, clutching her pearls. That is my money, my private property. It is the company's money, Arthur corrected. And until the audit is complete, the state considers it evidence. I walked over to the edge of the stage and pulled back the heavy curtains that covered the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the employee parking lot. And, speaking of assets, I said, pointing down to the street below, Kevin, is that your new Porsche 911 GT3? The one you bought last week, the one that cost $220,000. The entire room turned to look. Down on the wet pavement, a bright yellow tow truck was backing up to Kevin's gleaming silver sports car. A man in coveralls was already hooking the chains to the undercarriage. No! Kevin yelled, running to the window and pressing his hands against the glass like a child. Hey, stop, that is mine. You cannot take that. The dealership actually holds the title, I noted coldly. And since the check for the down payment bounced 20 minutes ago when the freeze went into effect, they are repossessing it. Goodbye, Kevin. It was a nice car. Too bad you never learned how to drive it properly. The sight of his beloved status symbol being dragged away broke something in Kevin. He turned eyes wild, looking for someone to blame, someone to save him. He grabbed his wife's arm. Baby, call your father. Tell him to get his lawyers. We need help. His wife, a woman who had happily sipped champagne in Hawaii and posted photos mocking my poverty, looked at Kevin's desperate hand on her arm. She looked at the angry crowd of employees. She looked at the police officers waiting in the wings. She physically recoiled, yanking her arm away as if Kevin were contagious. "Do not touch me," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the front rows to hear. She stepped back, creating a visible distance between herself and the sinking ship. "I had nothing to do with this. I did not know where the money came from. Linda told me it was a bonus. They lied to me. I am a victim too." "Chloe," Kevin gasped, betrayed. "You picked out the hotel. You ordered the lobster." "I am filing for annulment," she said coldly, turning her back on him and walking quickly toward the exit stairs, her high heels clicking a rapid retreat. She did not look back. I watched her go, feeling zero sympathy. They deserved each other. I turned back to the microphone. The room was buzzing with a vindictive energy now. The fear was gone, replaced by the collective realization that the tyrants were naked. "There is one last piece of business," I announced. I looked at Linda and Kevin. "As the acting representative of the majority shareholder, and with the authority of the board, I am terminating your employment at Summit Skyline effective immediately. You are fired for cause. You will receive no severance. You will receive no benefits. And you are permanently banned from entering any property owned by this company." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then one person in the back started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a roar. People were standing up, cheering, whistling. It was the sound of 300 people who had been bullied, threatened, and undervalued for years, finally seeing the bully get punched in the nose. The sound of that applause seemed to snap the last thread of Linda's sanity. She looked out at the people she considered ants, people she thought she owned, and saw them laughing at her. She looked at me, the stepson she had tried to destroy, standing tall in his maintenance uniform. She screamed a raw, animalistic sound of pure hatred. "You ungrateful little rat!" she screeched. She lunged at me. Her hands were clawed, aiming for my eyes. She moved with the hysterical strength of a cornered animal. But she never reached me. Two uniformed police officers, who had been waiting by the side of the stage, sprinted forward. One of them caught Linda by the arm, spinning her around. She thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. "Get off me! Do you know who I am? I am Linda Williams. I own this city." "Linda Williams," the officer said, forcing her hands behind her back. The metallic snick-snick of handcuffs engaging cut through her screams. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Another officer grabbed Kevin, who was sobbing openly now, offering no resistance as the cuffs were slapped onto his wrists. "And you, Kevin Miller," the officer recited. "You are under arrest for fraud and gross negligence endangering public safety." The room went quiet again, but this time it was a respectful silence, watching justice work. I looked at Linda. Her hair was disheveled strands, sticking to her wet face. Her expensive mascara had run down her cheeks in black streaks, making her look like a grotesque clown. The white power suit was rumpled. She looked nothing like the imperious queen who had ruled this company with fear. She looked exactly like what she was, a criminal. "Mark!" She pleaded, her tone shifting wildly, from rage to begging as the reality of the handcuffs set in. "Mark, please. Tell them to stop. I am your mother. We can work this out. I will give you your job back. I will give you a raise. Just tell them it was a mistake." I looked her dead in the eye. I remembered the nights in the van. I remembered the cold. I remembered the hunger. I remembered the email telling me my health insurance was canceled. "My mother died 20 years ago," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "And as for the job, I already have it." I nodded to the officers. "Take them away." The police marched them across the stage. Kevin was weeping, his legs dragging. Linda held her head up for a moment, trying to salvage some dignity, but as she passed the rows of employees she had tormented, she saw only cold stares and raised phones recording her downfall. She crumbled, sobbing into her chest, as they shoved her through the double doors. The doors swung shut, sealing them out. I stood there on the stage, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving behind a deep, exhausting sense of relief. I looked at Arthur. The old man was smiling a genuine, warm smile. "Well done, Mark," he said softly. I looked out at the staff, at the people waiting for a leader. I was not wearing a suit. I was wearing a dirty jumpsuit and work boots. But as I looked at them, I knew I had never looked more like the CEO of this company than I did right now. The cancer was cut out. Now the healing could begin. The heavy double doors clicked shut, sealing away the chaos of the police escort and the sobbing protests of my stepmother. The sound signaled the end of a 10-year nightmare. For a moment, the auditorium remained suspended in a breathless hush. 300 faces looked up at me. Minutes ago, they had been terrified for their livelihoods, expecting layoffs and austerity. Now they were looking at a man in a grease-stained maintenance jumpsuit, as if he were a captain who had just steered a sinking ship through a hurricane. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Arthur. The steel had left his eyes, replaced by a warmth I had not seen until now. He tapped the microphone stand with his cane to draw the room's attention one last time. "I am 75 years old," Arthur announced, his voice raspy but clear. "I have no desire to spend my retirement sitting in board meetings or arguing with auditors. I came here today for one reason, only to return a stolen legacy to its rightful guardian." He turned to me, and with a gravity that made my throat tight, he placed his hand on his chest. "As the majority shareholder of Summit Skyline, I am hereby stepping down as interim chairman. I am transferring my voting proxy and the day-to-day management of this firm to the only person in this room who knows the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. Mark Williams is your new CEO." The applause started slowly rippling from the engineers in the front row, the people who had worked late nights with me in the trenches, and spreading backward until the whole room was on its feet. It was a roar of validation that washed over me, scrubbing away the shame of the last 6 months. I raised a hand, asking for quiet. There was still work to do, hard work. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But we need to be honest with each other. Linda and Kevin left a mess. They drained the accounts. They compromised our reputation. Bah." I saw the fear creep back into the eyes of the administrative staff. "However," I continued firmly, "we are not going to solve this by firing people. The forensic accountants have already located the offshore accounts where Linda hid the embezzled funds. It is nearly $4 million. The courts have granted us an emergency injunction to claw that money back." I looked directly at the woman from accounting who had been crying earlier. "That money is not going into executive bonuses. It is not going into a company retreat. Every cent we recover will go first to restoring the pension fund they raided, and second to paying the back wages for every single employee in this room. You stuck with us through the lean times. You will be paid what you are owed." A collective sigh of relief swept through the hall, followed by cheers. But I had one more difficult pill to swallow. "There is one more thing," I said, and the room went quiet. "The Riverside Plaza." I projected the image of the faulty steel beams back onto the screen. "We cannot build this. I know we are behind schedule. I know the investors are screaming for a completion date. But if we finish this building with that steel, it will be a monument to greed. It will be unsafe." I took a deep breath. "As of this moment, I am halting construction on Riverside Plaza. We are stripping it down. We are removing every single beam of that cheap steel and replacing it with the grade 50 material that my father's designs called for. It is going to cost us millions. We will operate at a loss for the next 2 fiscal quarters. But when we cut the ribbon on that tower, we will know that it stands up because we did it right. Summit Skyline does not build death traps. We build landmarks." I expected silence. Instead, the head of the construction union stood up in the back. He tipped his hard hat to me. "We will work the overtime, Mark. Let us do it right." That night, for the first time in 6 months, I did not drive back to the vacant lot behind the warehouse. I drove my battered Ford Econoline to a scrapyard on the south side of the city. I sold it for $500. I patted the rusted hood one last time, thanking it for keeping me alive, and then I walked away. I did not look back. I did not buy a mansion. I did not move into the penthouse that Kevin had used as a bachelor pad. Instead, I rented a 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the office. It had hardwood floors, a coffee maker, and a shower with endless hot water. That first night I sat on the floor because I had no furniture, eating a pizza that was hot and fresh, and I felt richer than a king. A week later, Arthur came by the office. It was late past 8 in the evening, but the lights were still on. I was at my desk, surrounded by blueprints, rolling up my sleeves to fix the ventilation schematics for the retrofit. "You work too hard," Arthur said, placing a 6-pack of cheap domestic beer on the mahogany desk. "Your grandfather had the same problem." He pulled up a chair, and for the next 2 hours, we did not talk about business. We drank beer, and he told me stories I had never heard. He told me about the time my grandfather bet a crane operator $50 that he could walk a steel beam at 40 stories without a safety harness, and did it just to prove a point about balance. He told me how my father used to sneak drawings into the submission pile when he was just an intern. "They tried to erase them," Arthur said, looking at the skyline visible through the window. "Linda tried to scrub their names from the history of this city. She thought that if she took the money, she took the power. She never understood that the power of this family was never in the bank account. It was in the concrete. It was in the respect." He raised his bottle to me. "You earned it back, Mark. Not because you have the name, but because you have the hands." I realized then, looking at this 75-year-old man who had come out of retirement to save me, that family was not about whose DNA you shared. I shared DNA with Kevin, and he would have sold me for a sports car. Arthur was a stranger a week ago, and he had given me back my life. "To family," I said, clinking my bottle against his. Before I went home that night, I had one last administrative task to complete. I took a thick manila envelope and addressed it to the State Correctional Facility, inmate number 8940 Linda Williams, and inmate number 8941 Kevin Miller. I did not write a letter. I did not gloat. I did not tell them about the company's stock rebounding or the employees' morale soaring. They did not deserve my words. Instead, I slipped a single photograph inside. It was a candid shot Arthur had taken of me earlier that evening. I was sitting at my desk, tie-loosened, sleeves rolled up, buried under a mountain of paperwork with a half-eaten sandwich on the side. I looked exhausted. I looked stressed. But I also looked focused, driven, and exactly where I belonged. On the back of the photo, I wrote no insults. I simply wrote the date and a single sentence: "The view from the desk you never sat at." I sealed the envelope and dropped it in the outgoing mail bin. Walking home that night, the air was crisp and cold, much like the nights I had spent in the van. But this cold did not bite. It felt fresh. I looked up at the steel skeleton of the Riverside Plaza, rising against the stars. Tomorrow, the cranes would start moving again. We would tear out the rot. We would pour new foundations, and this time we would build something that would last forever. I was Mark Williams, the chief engineer, and I was finally home. 3 months had passed since the day the handcuffs clicked around Linda's wrists. The summer had turned into a crisp autumn, and the air in Seattle was filled with the smell of rain and falling leaves. Summit skyline was healing. The Riverside Plaza was no longer a hollow shell of dangerous metal. It was rising again floor by floor, this time built with integrity, and the best steel money could buy. I was working 14-hour days, but for the first time in my life, I was not tired. I was energized. I thought the war was over. I thought the monsters were locked away where they could not hurt us anymore. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a site inspection when my secretary called me, her voice trembling. She told me there were lawyers in the lobby. Not our lawyers. They were from Vanguard Development, our biggest and most ruthless competitor. I drove back to the office with a knot in my stomach. Vanguard was known for hostile takeovers. They were sharks that smelled blood in the water, and right now, despite our recovery, Summit Skyline was still bleeding cash from the reconstruction costs. When I walked into the conference room, 3 men in expensive suits were waiting. They did not shake my hand. The lead attorney simply slid a document across the table. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "As of this morning, Vanguard Development has purchased the outstanding debt on the Riverside project from your creditors. We also hold a sworn affidavit from your stepmother, Linda Williams, contesting the transfer of voting rights." I stared at the paper. "Linda is in jail awaiting trial. She has no rights." "She has the right to legal counsel," the lawyer smirked. "And she has hired one of the best firms in the state. She managed to pay their retainer by selling some, let us call them intellectual property assets to us. Specifically, the client lists and the bid projections for next year." My blood ran cold. Even from a concrete cell, she was venomous. She had sold our secrets to the enemy just to fund one last attack. "Here is the situation," the lawyer continued. "Linda is suing to invalidate Arthur Pendleton's takeover, claiming the Guardian Covenant is legally ambiguous. While that lawsuit is pending, the company's assets are frozen again. And since we now own your debt and you are technically in default due to the construction delays we are calling the loan, you owe us $5 million payable in 48 hours. If you cannot pay, we take the company. We take the land. We take everything." I sat there stunned. $5 million. We didn't have it. We had poured every cent into fixing the steel. Linda knew that. She was willing to burn the company to the ground and hand it to a rival, just to spite me. "You have 48 hours, the lawyer said, standing up. "Start packing your boxes, Mr. Williams." I stormed out of the room and drove straight to Arthur's house. I was panicking. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. After everything we had fought for, after the hunger and the humiliation, were we really going to lose? Because of a legal loophole and a debt trap, I burst into Arthur's study. He was sitting by the fire reading a book, looking infuriatingly calm. "They have us, Arthur," I said, pacing the room. "Vanguard bought the debt. Linda sold them the data. They are going to foreclose on the land in 2 days. We are finished. The company is gone." Arthur closed his book slowly. He took off his reading glasses and looked at me. There was no fear in his eyes, only a spark of amusement. "Sit down, Mark," he said gently. "I cannot sit down," I shouted. "Did you hear me? They are taking the land. The skyscrapers, the headquarters, the Riverside project. It sits on prime real estate worth hundreds of millions. If they foreclose, they get it all." "They can try," Arthur said. He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a single thin file. It was old, the paper yellowed with age. "But they are making a very common mistake. They assume Summit Skyline owns the land." I stopped pacing. "What?" "Your grandfather was a visionary, Mark," Arthur said, tapping the file. "He knew that businesses rise and fall. He knew that banks are predatory and that family members can be treacherous. So 30 years ago, when he bought the city blocks that our buildings stand on, he did not put the deeds in the company name." Arthur opened the file. "He put them in a trust, the Thomas Williams Charitable Foundation." I stared at the document. "A charity." "A non-profit land trust," Arthur corrected. "I am the sole trustee. Summit Skyline does not own the dirt it stands on, Mark. It leases it. We are tenants. The foundation is the landlord." "But how does that help us?" I asked, confused. "Vanguard can still seize the company and the lease." "Read paragraph 4, section 2, Arthur said, pointing to a clause in the lease agreement. I leaned in and read the faded type. The ground lease shall automatically terminate and revert all rights to the foundation in the event that any executive officer or majority shareholder of the tenant entity is indicted for or convicted of a felony involving financial fraud or moral turpitude. I read it again, and then a third time. "The morality clause," Arthur said, a smile spreading across his face. Thomas put it in to ensure that his buildings would never be run by criminals. The moment the police put handcuffs on Linda and charged her with embezzlement, this lease became voidable at the discretion of the trust. I looked up at him, the realization washing over me like a warm wave. Meaning, Arthur said, standing up, that if Vanguard takes over the company, they get an empty shell. They get the debt, but they do not get the land. The foundation owns the land. And as the trustee, I can evict them before they even change the locks. They bought $5 million of bad debt for a building they legally cannot enter. "And the land?" I asked. "Who controls it?" "The foundation," Arthur said. "And the foundation needs a new director, someone with the name Williams." He handed me a pen. "Sign here, Mark. You are not just the CEO of the company anymore. You are the landlord. You own the ground beneath their feet." We met the Vanguard lawyers the next morning. I did not pack any boxes. I sat at the head of the table with Arthur on my right. When they demanded the payment, Arthur simply slid the land trust deed and the termination notice across the table. The lead lawyer read it. His face went pale. He whispered something to his colleague, who started frantically typing on his laptop, checking the property records. The colleague stopped typing and nodded grimly. "You bought the debt on a building that just lost its ground lease," I said, leaning back in my chair. "If you foreclose, you own a pile of steel and glass that you have to dismantle and move, because you do not have the right to keep it on my land. So here is my counteroffer. You will forgive the debt, and in exchange I will not sue you for receiving stolen trade secrets from Linda. And then you will get out of my office." The lawyer looked at the deed. He looked at me. He realized he had been outplayed by a dead man from 30 years ago. He closed his briefcase. "We will review your terms," he muttered. They left. They never came back. The threat was gone. Linda's last desperate gamble had backfired spectacularly. By trying to sell the company, she had triggered the very clause that stripped her of everything. She was now in a prison cell, facing 10 years with no money for lawyers and no company to fight for. She was truly alone. 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold evening, I took the service elevator up to the roof of the newly completed Riverside Plaza. The wind was whipping around the steel spires, but I did not feel the cold. I walked to the edge and looked down at the city of Seattle. I saw the lights of the traffic, the ferry boats crossing the dark water, and the other towers my family had built. Arthur was standing there leaning on his cane, looking out at the horizon. "It is a good view," Arthur said. "It is," I agreed. I pulled out my phone. One last thing. I stood next to Arthur with the city lights blazing behind us. I held up the phone and snapped a selfie. In the photo, Arthur looked like a proud general, and I looked like a man who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. I opened my messages and found the number for the prison inmate communication system. I attached the photo. I typed a message to Kevin. "The building is finished. The foundation is solid. And the land is ours. I wish you had learned how to be a decent human being instead of a rich one." I hit send. I put the phone in my pocket and turned to Arthur. "Ready to go." "After you, Mr. Director," Arthur said. We walked toward the door, leaving the roof behind. The story of revenge was over. The story of building a life, building a legacy, and building a future was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Mark's journey. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, cold, please subscribe to the channel, Calm Revenge Stories like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay safe and remember, the truth always wins.